Welcome to Chapter 5, Prenatal Development, the Newborn, and the Transition to Parenthood. Here's a list of the learning questions for this chapter. There will be one video lecture for each learning question. So we'll be dealing with the 3 stages of prenatal development in this video. In video 2, we'll look at the health issues and risks that can affect a pregnancy. Video 3, we'll look at labor and delivery. In video 4, we'll look at risks to the newborn's well-being. And in video 5, we'll talk about the transition to parenthood. So let's look at the 3 stages of prenatal development. The first stage is known as the germinal stage, and it lasts from 0 to 2 weeks, meaning from conception or fertilization until 2 weeks following. And it all begins with the woman releasing a mature egg from her ovary in a process known as ovulation. So the mature egg is released into that tube, which is called the fallopian tube, and the egg begins traveling along the fallopian tube towards the uterus. If there happens to be sperm in the woman's system, and if there are, they would be swimming up this fallopian tube, then you may get fertilization taking place which is basically just the process of a sperm uniting with an egg. We also call that conception. It's basically the same term. Conception or fertilization can be used. When the sperm unites with the egg, it creates a single cell, the first cell of life. The sperm carries 23 chromosomes from the father. The egg carries 23 chromosomes from the mother. When they unite, it forms a single cell with 23 pairs or 46 total chromosomes, which is what humans have. So we are a one-cell organism to begin. We call that one cell a zygote, Z-Y-G-O-T-E. And after about 15 hours following conception, the first cell division takes place. That single cell zygote divides from one single cell and becomes 2 cells, 2 identical cells. So the 46 chromosomes, the 23 pairs of chromosomes, are copied, and so that both cells that form after the first division each have a copy of the genetic material, the chromosomes, and which contain your genes and your DNA. Okay. This cell division continues as is. Now it's a ball of cells. It's moving still along the fallopian tube towards the uterus. 2 cells will become 4 cells. 4 cells will then become 8 cells, etc. So they all divide at the same time. So you go from 4 to 8 to 16. When it gets up to about 32 cells, this is typically around 4 to 5 days after fertilization. This ball of cells, takes a new form, and it becomes what we call a blastocyst. You can see that word in the diagram here. And this is this goes along with the point. This is creation of the blastula. A blastula is this is something that forms for any animal, okay, during the germinal stage. So blastula just refers to the general term for any animal. Blastocyst specifically refers to the blastula for mammals. We call it a blastocyst. So we are a mammal, so I would typically refer to it as a blastocyst. So the blastocyst is just a type of blastula. Okay. Anyway, so it becomes, this is once again, somewhere around 4 to 5 days, you can see that it's originally a ball of cells, and then it takes a new form where it becomes a blastocyst, and it has an inner cell mass, shown in the picture here, and also an outer layer of cells. The outer layer of cells is called the trophoblast, Tropho blast, trophoblast. Okay. This blastocyst continues into the uterus, and after about 1 week following conception, the blastocyst begins implanting in the uterine wall. So it needs to kind of, basically, this is like it needs to become stuck against the wall, and that's where the organism will form, and the placenta will form, inside the uterine wall there, and so that the mother and developing embryo or fetus can exchange molecules such as nutrients and water, or going from the fetus to the mother would be waste products. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But okay, so after 1 week, implantation starts. The implantation should be the blastocyst should be fully implanted by about the end of 2 weeks, which ends this stage with the blastocyst being firmly implanted in the uterine wall. This implantation does not always go smoothly. It's estimated that between 30 to 50% of all conceptions end up not being properly implanted, and therefore they get dispelled during the woman's menstrual cycle without the woman ever having any indication that a conception or fertilization took place. So once again, that's like 30 to 50%, like up to half of all conceptions do not implant properly, and they get dispelled. Okay. Let me see what else I want to say here. Oh yeah, one last note before I move on. There are an approximately equal number of males and females that are conceived. So when a sperm meets an egg and forms that zygote, approximately half the time it's going to be biologically male at this point, or half the time it's going to be biologically female. So it's pretty much evenly split. Half of conceptions male, half female. By the time birth takes place, so the ratio is a little bit different, slightly different. There are approximately 105 males born for every 100 females born. So there's slightly more males that are born than females, even though there's the same number conceived of both genders, both sexes, I should say, actually. There are more female losses. I mean, there are more female conceived embryos or fetuses that do not make it through the full pregnancy term. So this is why you end up with, a handful of extra male births for every 100 females. It's not a, hugely different ratio, but we do have more. I just want to point out we have more males born than females. But, that kind of counterbalances that through every span of the lifespan, through every age of the lifespan, males have a higher mortality rate. So more males die early in childhood, later in childhood, in adolescence, and in adulthood compared to females. So we start with more males, and then it kind of evens out with more males dying throughout the lifespan, and it evens out. And then we end up actually, by the time you get to older ages, there are more females than males in society. Okay, so that's just a quick look at the start of life and then in the first couple of weeks. Here's a couple of terms I already talked about. So that blastocyst, remember that's when it gets up to 32 cells, it then forms a blastocyst, which is a hollow ball. It has an inner cell mass, which is eventually going to become the embryo, the organism. The trophoblast is, I mentioned, is the outer layer. That layer of cells is eventually going to become the placenta, which is the support system for the pregnancy. Okay. One. In the next stage, the embryonic stage, it lasts from, first of all, it lasts from 2 weeks until 2 months, so 2 weeks till 8 weeks. And one important thing we see happening during the embryonic stage is what's called cell differentiation. Cell differentiation. Cells start to take on different purposes. I mean, they did with that blastocyst. I mean, you had the outer layer that's going to become the placenta. The inner cell mass is going to become the embryo. So there was a differentiation there. Differentiation just means cells start to have different purposes. Well, this inner cell mass now forms 3 layers of cells that have different purposes. So we have names for each of these layers. The ectoderm is the outer layer of cells. This is what's going to become your skin, your sense organs, your brain, and your spinal cord. The middle layer of cells is called the mesoderm. It becomes your muscles, blood, bones, and circulatory system. And then the inner mass of cells is called the endoderm, and it becomes your respiratory system, digestive system, liver, and pancreas. One easy way that I've always used, just to remember which layer is which, which one's the outer layer, which one's the inner layer. I mean, just in case you were asked or had to label a diagram or anything like that at some point. Just to always remember which term goes with which, I just use 3 letters. I mean, ectoderm has a T very early. That is the outer layer, also with a T. So you match the T's. Ecto, outer. Mesoderm is the middle layer, so that's easy. They both start with M. So you match the M's. And the endoderm is the inner layer. So you can match the N. Endo, inner. So I don't know, it's just always stuck with me. As soon as I see ectoderm, I think outer. I see endoderm, I think inner. Obviously, mesoderm is middle. Okay, so a little memory aid. Once again, this is known as cell differentiation. And this is the inner cell mass that is forming these 3 different, groupings of cells, 3 layers of cells. Okay, the placenta develops during the embryonic stage in order to nourish the embryo. So what happens in the placenta is that oxygen and water and nutrients that are within the mother's blood system get picked up by the the embryo blood system at this point. It's not quite a fetus yet. So it gets picked up by the embryo's blood system. It's a transfer that takes place. I'm just going to backtrack here. You can see kind of close up here. This is part of the placenta that they're showing. You can see the umbilical cord carries blood vessels from the embryo to the placenta, which is like developing, against the uterine wall. Anyways, what happens in the placenta is that the embryo's blood vessels come very close to the mother's blood vessels, and and without the blood systems ever intermingling. So the blood never, goes together. So this is why the mother and the developing baby they can have different blood systems because they never actually contact each other. What happens is that oxygen and nutrient molecules and water molecules they flow out of the mother's blood system within the pancreas, and they go through a semi-permeable um, what do I want to say, semi-permeable membrane, um, which allow those small nutrients and they pass into the fetus or the embryo's blood system. So there's an exchange of molecules that take place. And so this is how the baby gets nourished, um, excuse me, and oxygenated. Uh, in in a similar fashion, the embryo or fetus um, gets rid of waste products. So waste products are carried outwards from the developing fetus through the blood system, and then the molecules go into the mother's blood system. So the baby's getting the good stuff, oxygen and nutrients and water, and sending waste to the mother's blood system. And then the mother disposes of that waste, in normal disposal methods. I don't know how to put it, but okay, it gets into the mother's system and she disposes of it. Okay. Um, so anyways, that's the purpose of placenta. It's an exchange of waste from the fetus or embryo and an intake of oxygen, nutrients, and water molecules. Okay. Um, Also, during this second stage, the embryonic stage, organogenesis takes place. This refers to the development of internal organs. In fact, all major organ systems of the body are laid down in a rudimentary fashion during this embryonic stage. This is why we consider it a critical period. I'll talk more about that on the next slide. Also, by the end of the stage, the rudimentary heart will actually begin to beat. Development of the embryo and then the fetus takes place in what's called a cephalocaudal direction of development. This comes from the word from two separate words: cephalus. It refers to head. Caudal refers to tail. I can't remember. I believe these are Latin words, but I don't have that written down. But they sound Latin to me. Anyway, cephalus means head. Caudal means tail. So it translates to head to tail development. Now we don't really have a tail anymore, so it just basically means top down development. And so your head is going to develop, first and quicker than your torso, or quicker than your arms. And your torso is going to develop ahead of your legs, and your legs will develop ahead of your feet, and your toes are kind of last on the downwards list, for development. This cephalocaudal direction of development, this is just as true after birth as it is during the prenatal months. So prenatally, it's developing in this direction, but after birth, when we get to talk about young children, we'll bring this term up again, because certainly after birth, it's you can still see the cephalocaudal direction of development, where this is why young children seem to have very small legs, because they're kind of low down on the body, and they seem to have big head. If you ever look at a baby, it seems to have a big head. In fact, at 9 weeks following conception, 9 weeks of prenatal development, the head of the developing fetus represents half of the entire length of the fetus, because the brain is developing so rapidly that the head needs to develop first. The brain is certainly the most complex organ that needs to develop in a human, It takes the longest time. It takes the most intricate development. I mean, it continues long after birth takes place. But so because it needs to start early, and I mean, this is why the head develops first, so it can, so you have, you can, the brain can develop within the skull of the baby. Okay, so the head represents half of the length. Oh, okay, let's go on. As I already kind of referred to, the embryonic stage of prenatal development is considered a critical period for development because all major organs and other structures are undergoing rapid development. When I say other structures, the eyes are beginning to form, the ears, so various sense organs. You also have some rudimentary limb formation. So really, it's like, everything that all the different systems of the body, the organs and the limbs and the senses, I mean, they all begin developing in this embryonic period, which is why it's such a critical, important period. And so because they undergo rapid development during this embryonic period, any damage done at this point can be very severe and irreversible. It turns out that if there is harmful agents that are introduced into the prenatal environment, let's say the mother, I don't know, does some heavy duty drugs or something during the embryonic period, whatever is forming at that time that the drugs enter the system is what will be affected. So if it's, during a period where the eyes are beginning to form, perhaps the baby's born blind. If it's when the ears are forming, perhaps the baby is born deaf. I mean, if it's when the heart's forming, maybe the baby's born with a heart murmur, and etc. I mean, so if the limbs are forming, maybe there's some kind of malformation of the limbs, and anyway, so whatever is forming at that period that harmful agents are introduced from the environment, such as the mother taking some heavy duty drugs. I mean, that particular systems is what's affected. Once systems are done forming, they're less susceptible to damage. They can still be damaged. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the damage can be done all the way up until the end of the prenatal period, but it's much more likely while a system is being formed. And this is why the embryonic period is a critical period, because there is such rapid development of the organs and other systems of the body, and they are most at risk. Okay, and as I said, severe and irreversible. Okay, one more slide in this video, and we get to the final and third stage of prenatal development, called the fetal stage. This is from 2 months all the way up until birth. I'm not going to go through all the details of this, 7 months or so period. There's a couple of videos I include on Blackboard that go into more details about what's developing month after month, and you should watch those. I'm going to point out a few highlights though. First of all, the nickname for this stage is the finishing and fattening stage. It's called the finishing stage, comes from the fact that all of those organs that were being laid down and began developing in the embryonic stage, they finished developing, including your senses are going to finish developing during this stage. And so everything that was started in the embryonic period finishes in the fetal stage, and most of those systems finish somewhat early in the fetal stage. Towards the end of the fetal stage, after a lot of these systems are already completed, what's really needed in the last few months of the pregnancy is fattening. So that's where fattening comes in. The baby needs to put on sufficient weight in order to survive outside the womb. So the baby is building up its body mass, particularly in the last few months of development. Okay, so finishing with fattening. A few highlights, as I mentioned. First of all, sexual differentiation. Um, around 9 weeks, at about 9 weeks post-conception, if the baby received um, a Y chromosome, meaning that the baby's genes make it biologically male, then at around 9 weeks, the testes begin to produce the hormone androgen. It's considered a male hormone, androgen. Um, and this alters the development of the genitalia from that point on, and you get male genitals forming and a male reproductive system forming. Otherwise, if there is no production of androgen, then the female genitalia and reproduction systems form. So it's kind of like there's either androgen causing the formation of male genitalia, or there's a lack of androgen. If it's not being produced, then the fallback is that female genitalia get and and reproduction system gets formed. Okay, and this is occurring by 9 weeks. At 10 weeks, we see evidence of prenatal breathing in the fetus. Now, breathing is in quotes because as you hopefully should know, the fetus it doesn't have air around it to breathe. It is submerged in amniotic fluid. Okay, so amniotic fluid is all around the developing fetus. Um, it's basically floating in amniotic fluid. So this prenatal breathing is actually the breathing of amniotic fluid. So it's not actually getting oxygen through this process. It is basically working its newly developing lungs. So it's almost like practice breathing in a sense. So it's breathing fluid in and out. So just a little bit more about amniotic fluid now that I brought it up. So what's the purpose of amniotic fluid surrounding the developing fetus? Well, it has three purposes, really. The first is that the amniotic fluid helps with the exchange of nutrients, water, and biochemical products between the mother and the fetus. Secondly, the amniotic fluid acts as a cushion so that the fetus is not bouncing around inside the womb. So if the mother's jogging or I don't know, like doing some kind of exercise, and I mean, you wouldn't want the fetus like I said, bouncing around inside the womb. So the fluid cushions the developing fetus. And thirdly, the amniotic fluid helps with temperature control. So even though the mother may go into a cold environment or a hotter environment, this helps to protect the baby, the fetus, I should say, from getting too cold or too hot. Eventually, just to let you know, I mean, that certainly isn't foolproof. I mean, for instance, let's say a mother was to submerge herself in like a hot tub. If it was, longer than 5 minutes, then at some point that amniotic fluid is going to start heating up, and you can actually cause the fetus to develop a fever. This is why doctors would tell expectant mothers not to spend any more than 5 minutes submerged in hot liquids such as a bath or a hot tub. I mean, if they're in warm water, it's fine; it won't overheat. But if you're in really hot water, you have to limit your time. So the amniotic fluid is protecting the fetus for a while, like from getting extremely overheated in those circumstances. But like I said, it's not foolproof. Eventually, it will overheat. Similarly, if the mother is outside in winter weather and she's chilled, I mean, the amniotic fluid is helping to keep the fetus warm. it will retain heat for a while, even as the mother starts to get cold. Okay. Development of the senses takes place. They, like I said, they started in the embryonic stage, but all the senses obviously finished developing prior to birth. I say they finished developing. That maybe isn't quite accurate. I mean, they're all workable when a baby is born. We'll talk later in this chapter. We'll talk more about infant senses, um, or actually it may even maybe later. Yeah, I think it's later in this chapter. We'll talk about infant senses. But I mean, so like there's still development that goes on after birth. You know, your vision is going to increase significantly during the first few months of life, um, etc. The auditory improves during the first year of life, um, particularly first 6 months. Anyways, but they're all in place and they're working to some degree. So, I mean, when a baby is born, it can hear, it can see, it can touch, it can taste, it can smell. Okay. The between 12 to 16 weeks. So this is, approximately between 3 to 4 months. The mother will often start to feel movement of the fetus. This is the first, time period where mothers report feeling movement. And initially, it's just like a very slight flutter that they will feel um, at this point between 3 to 4 months. And finally, I mentioned at 9 weeks, the male testes start to produce androgen hormones, and anyways, the prenatal hormones are very important, not just for sexual development, which is one thing that they help to control, but also the prenatal hormones also influence the development of the nervous system and the brain. And so this is why by 26 weeks, prenatally, 26 weeks following conception, you actually can see observable differences in the brain structure between males and females. So because the males are generating androgens, the male hormone, females would be producing estrogen during the fetal stage, and this is going to lead to differences in brain development. So you can already see structural differences at 26 weeks prenatal. Okay, and that's all I'm going to do here. Remember, there are a couple of videos on Blackboard. You can get a lot more details about month by month what's developing prenatally.